Welcome to Sound Bites, hosted by registered dietitian nutritionist Melissa Joy Dobbins.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Sound Bites podcast. This is episode 126. I wanted to let you know that when we start talking about snowstorms and bad weather in this episode, that's because this episode was recorded back in April and I didn't air it until now for a few reasons. But yeah, you might be like, wait, it's August and it's hot out, so what's the deal with the snow? So that's the deal with that. Also, in the episode, I mentioned two other episodes that I've done, and I couldn't remember the numbers, so I wanted to share those with you in the intro. I talk about Jason Reese's episode on critical thinking and behavior change, and that's episode number 108. And also Jenny Schmidt, her episode on soil health, weed control, and glyphosate is number 98. Now, today's guest is Janice Person, and we talk a lot about difficult conversations. I'm not sure if you're subscribed to my newsletter, but hopefully you are. Please do subscribe to the podcast and my newsletter, which comes out about once a month, so I don't clutter your inbox. And you can also get notifications for the podcasts as they come out as well. Those are just really brief, short, hey, there's been a new episode out and here are the recent episodes. If you are subscribed to my newsletter, you will have noticed that in June, I was on the road a lot doing some media trainings, but actually they weren't exactly media trainings. They were more communications trainings. I went to New England, to beautiful Stowe, Vermont, and I may have mentioned this in another episode or intro, but I wanted to bring it up again because Janice and I are talking a lot about difficult conversations. So my media training, which like I said is more of a communications training, we're really focusing on difficult conversations about sustainable nutrition, talking about a lot of the topics that we discuss on the show, such as confirmation bias, sort of the complexities and trade-offs with sustainability, and trying to communicate with others with words that really resonate, but ultimately about having productive conversations. So I worked with the New England Dairy Council and also the National Dairy Council, which is right here in my backyard in Chicago. I also traveled to Idaho and talked to the Idaho School Nutrition Association about critical thinking and handling questions about nutrition, school lunch, and things like that. So I did a keynote for their conference and then a breakout session workshop. We also talk about my storytelling class at the National Institutes of Health back in February. Talk about that during the interview a little bit. And I actually took a different kind of storytelling class, the more common or popular type of storytelling class this summer, and learned to do more of the narrative arc and the art of storytelling, if you will. I did my first live storytelling event on August 6th, and it went really well. And I'll be doing this story again at a big fundraising event that the Evanston Dance Ensemble is holding. I'm on their board of directors, and I take ballet, jazz, and modern at the Dance Center Evanston. So I'm involved in that. And I'm thinking about maybe doing the story at the end of one of the podcasts. It's like a little outro. But it's been really fun to take an experience in my life. And I'll just give you a little teaser. It has to do with the first house I bought in 1999 and the shocking and surprising things that I found in a hidden shelf in the kitchen cupboard. So if you guys want me to share the story as an outro of the podcast, I'm happy to do that. It has nothing to do with nutrition, but just sort of expanding my communications wings a little bit and getting back to some of my theater roots. So I wanted to share that with you and give you all the information that I had mentioned during the episode that I would share with you in the intro. So thank you again for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And as always, connect with me on social media or email. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Melissa Joy RD. And you can always reach out to me by email at melissa@soundbitesrd.com. And as always, you can get all the resources and links to everything that we discuss on the show notes at soundbitesrd.com. Hope you enjoy today's show. Hello, and welcome back to the Soundbites podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Joy Dobbins, a registered dietitian nutritionist. And on the show, we delve into the science, the psychology, and the strategies behind good food and nutrition. And today's show is all about farming, agriculture, and communications, whether it's social media or talking to your neighbor or trying to tell a story so that you can communicate more clearly about modern farming or anything under this big umbrella of farming and agriculture. So my guest today is Janice Person. She is the online engagement director for Bear Crop Science based in St. Louis and is frequently known by her handle, JP Loves Cotton. Janice was among the early adopters of Twitter, recently celebrating her 10th anniversary on the site. And she's used that platform and others to connect people involved in farming and food. Welcome to the show, Janice.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. You know, we met on Twitter, and as I'm sure a lot of your colleagues, friends, comrades, you've met on Twitter because you have been there so long and kind of pioneered some of the agriculture conversations on Twitter, and you love connecting people. So I don't remember when we met on Twitter, but I do remember the first time we met in person was actually in an elevator in Chicago. I think it was at the Hyatt at the Blog Her conference. I think it was like 2015. And it was funny because I looked over and I was like, I think that's JP Loves Cotton.
Yeah. It's so funny when you meet people behind the avatars after you've known them for a while, right? And and that Blog Her was probably like 7-8 years ago. I can't remember.
I don't think it was that long ago, but it
feels
could
like
have been.
Forever ago. It may have been Blog Her Food.
It was Blog Her Food.
More recent. Okay.
It was.
No, it was great fun. And so strange to be known as JP Loves Cotton because I picked the name out of, kind of a random process one day. And I had no idea I was establishing a personal brand.
And it's kind of stuck. Actually, I was always like, why does JP love cotton? And, it was a while before I knew that your name was Janice Person. I just knew you as JP. So let's hear a little bit more about your background, and that will help us unravel the mystery of JP Loves Cotton.
Yeah, I think my path is maybe unique in some ways, but it's really very common in lots of other ways. So I grew up a city girl in the city of Memphis. Older than I would like to admit. So there were some exciting things going on in Memphis at the time. My grandmother lived in an all-Black neighborhood, and we lived in a mostly white neighborhood. So race relations was a big part of my growing up. So were politics. But I always wanted to be a communicator. My mom will tell people when I came home from summer camp the first year, not only did I have names and addresses for people, I wrote letters, and not just for a couple of weeks, but like off and on throughout the year. So I loved staying in touch with people. And so when social media showed up, that was just such an easy way to do it, especially for somebody like me who's been so mobile and moved around so many places. And part of what I found as I got introduced to agriculture and to cotton specifically by a friend of our family who wanted to help me learn communications and journalism. And like so many other people in the U.S. these days, my family didn't have any kind of background in farming or agriculture. And when I had the opportunity to go out on the farm the first time, this sweet man, Mr. Ray Young, down in Louisiana, took time to talk to me about the differences in his soil from one field to another, what happens when the rain comes in this area, what he was doing to sort of make sure he held the soil in the field instead of letting it wash onto the roads or into the rivers. And I was hooked. Mr. Ray got me hook, line, and sinker. And I worked in the cotton business off and on. I've been in agriculture my entire career, but a good part of my career I was focused on the cotton business. So when I got online, there weren't very many people who were focused on the cotton business. And it was a way to kind of say, here's what I know about, maybe more than some others. I have a certain level of expertise. I'm not necessarily an expert, but my passion for the crop and my ability to connect with other people really is kind of where I'm more of an expert. Like I can find folks who can tell you all kinds of things about the crop of cotton that people wouldn't know. So I go everywhere from the farm side and picking out seed to plant all the way to the finished goods and different types of textiles and processes they do to kind of figure out how to make a new kind of denim or find a way to make jeans look worn where they're not acid washed or something like that. So it's a very strange background and it all kind of comes together. It's my personal life. It's what I love doing. And it's this part of agriculture that I'm really passionate about.
Mm-hmm. So cotton and soil, it sounds like, was sort of your entree into the world of ag. And since then, you have kind of taken the detour to get involved with more food-related agriculture. But you studied journalism and communications in college. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, I went to a really small private school in Enid, Oklahoma for college. It was smaller than my high school in Memphis. And there I studied mass communication, so creating videos, writing stuff for newspapers, all those kind of things. And then I got my master's degree in journalism from the University of Memphis. And it's funny, if you come into my office, people don't notice it very often, but there's a picture on the wall. And the other day, one of the girls came in and she's like, "Can I read that for a minute?" And I didn't realize that she actually knew Russian. So I did my thesis on politics. At the time, it was really exciting and there was a lot changing in Russia and it was opening up. Obviously, it's not the case now. But so my thesis was on politics in Russia. It was all about how journalism is being treated there, though. And so I was able to meet with newspapers editors all throughout Volgograd. It was a city that had about 9 newspapers, and I got to meet with all of them.
Wow. So whoa, okay, I didn't know that. So
I didn't do that in the vetting process. Sorry.
Right? Very interesting. So then I wonder, because I know that you grew up with parents with different political views. I wonder if that kind of sparked something in you that led to the thesis in politics or...
Yeah, I really loved political science and activism and things from my high school days on and had a minor in political science in college. And the professors I had were simply amazing. And if you were paying attention to what was happening in the world at the time I was in college, which says so much about how old I am, you would have noticed Gorbachev and Reagan having a lot of conversations. And it really was a time where the world was looking very differently. And so for me, I couldn't help but watch that throughout my college years. And then when I was in grad school and you get to pick your own thesis topic and you get to do sort of whatever you want to, I was looking at how Gorbachev was approaching the media and things were opening up and there was so much more news and information coming out of Russia. And you were learning, it was still the Soviet Union, but you were learning so much more about the way that part of the world works. And they were learning so much more about the way we worked. It was a very open and transparent time. It's very unique to look back on it now.
I bet. Wow. Interesting. Okay. So thank you for this little background and sort of trip down memory lane.
But I've always been interested in those opinions that maybe diverge from, the common. So growing up in Memphis, race could be really polarizing. So can politics. So can agriculture today. So it's kind of a theme across, I think, my lifetime that I've been in areas where topics could be kind of heated. And luckily, I had a mom who taught me very early in life, it's okay to disagree with people. It's okay to take a different stand. Know what you want, know what you think, research and stand up for yourself. It's good. You don't have to be mean about it, though. And I think that's one of the pieces that's missing a little bit in some of the conversations today. There's such aggressive tones taken on so many topics. And certainly on social media, you see that.
Right. Absolutely. And we're going to talk a lot about social media and listening and communicating better. But just a quick mention, I mentioned your title and that you work for Bayer, which for those who aren't aware, that's formerly Monsanto, but this episode is not sponsored, and we may or may not talk about Monsanto or GMOs. We'll see what comes up, but that's not the focus, but we'll see where the conversation takes us. But back to what you were saying with regard to this sort of like recipe, I guess, is, I was thinking perfect storm, but that's not the right analogy. But this recipe, these ingredients that you grew up with for kind of knowing it's okay to disagree, but being respectful and kind of seeing some big changes going on in the environment, in our culture, in the media, kind of maybe prepping you for where you are today with being able to communicate difficult or controversial or confrontational or just unfamiliar information to people who are hungry for it and who are open to having a respectful dialogue. And also, I know you're really good at handling those who aren't so respectful. But I wanted you to share your food philosophy, because we were talking about this offline, about how food brings people together. I'd like you to share that a little bit.
Yeah. It's for me, food is a highly emotional topic to discuss with people, right? So in my family, food is what brings us together. It's certainly this weekend, I'm going home for a funeral, and I can guarantee you there's going to be all the things, right? As we mourn the loss of somebody, food's a major part of that. My niece will be graduating soon. It'll be the keystone of some of the celebrations. It's all about her. But in the meantime, we're going to be together all day long, right? And food's going to play a big part in that. I think what's changed over the last few years is that we have all these like buzzwords and these things that are just kind of hitting us in different ways. And sometimes it's hard just to be able to enjoy food and people. It can get kind of hard for us. And I think that we've lost sight of just doing the right thing and stuff. So in my family, anybody has an allergy, we would all know that and we would take care of that. And that would be, well done. Nobody would make demands on us. We have a number of special diets in our family. So we'll have a lasagna here with a lot of meat in it, and we'll have a lasagna there that has no meat in it, mm-hmm. right? And things like that. But it brings people together. And somewhere when you move to a large-scale conversation online, people forget that that's the way we all live our lives at home. And we decide to start taking these stands. And suddenly, if everything I make isn't gluten-free, then that means I don't care about people who, need a gluten-free diet, which is so far from the truth, right? Mm. But it's the kind of thing that people can quickly misread about a person in this online space. So I don't know. It's been a tough one for me. I never thought that handling polarizing topics would make me better able to talk about food than some people. But I think these days, a lot of us have lost the ability to just respect people that we don't necessarily know. I think we trust people we know dearly and we respect them wholeheartedly. And then we start engaging with people online and maybe we don't carry that same idea of the benefit of the doubt. If you're talking in 200 characters, it's kind of hard to give your whole food philosophy. And so a lot of us use buzzwords, and sometimes that means they get heated. I was in a session at South by Southwest recently, and a gentleman said he no longer calls himself a vegan. He says he eats a plant-based diet because he's found vegan has become a charged, aggressive word for a lot of people because the way some people use it. And I think that seems silly, but yet I really appreciate him thinking about the way other people receive it, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what a lot of us sometimes miss, and especially because we get so excited about something, we're so closely tied into things. And, for a wheat farmer to hear everybody talking about being gluten-free as if there's something wrong with gluten, it gets very personal.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Or for a cattle rancher to be hearing, somebody say that everybody ought to be vegan, they're like, what? No, not everybody needs to be vegan. Hey, wait a minute. I like a good steak now and then. And it's a very interesting kind of way of going about this conversation. And I think too often, a lot of us think we need to be heard more than we need to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the ratio that's right if you think you need to be heard more than you need to listen.
Right. What is it that all the kindergarten teachers say? There's a reason you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You
Exactly.
need to listen twice as much.
Exactly.
It's hard, though. It's hard. It is hard. Okay, so you mentioned South by Southwest, and I want to talk more about that because I know that you had a really interesting and exciting time there and you learned a lot, and I definitely want to get into that. But maybe a good place for us to transition to here would be maybe talking about some of the specific examples regarding farming or ag communications, maybe some examples where you've seen people kind of do a 180 or kind of have an aha moment, even if it's just not having that door closed, but having the door open to learning more. Or, in general, what you feel people need to know about farming. There's a misconception with big ag. That's a term, speaking of polarizing, I feel like there are certain terms that just make my hair stand on end.
I think it's like that for all of us. And it's funny how much we can find there's one certain thing that kind of pushes my buttons. I mean, our families are the best about this, right? Growing up, your brothers and sisters all know how to push your buttons. And, our parents would tell us, honey, you know that they're pushing your buttons. Stop it. Don't react. Well, I think in today as an adult, it's more like, I need to understand what is going to push my buttons, and I need to think about how I want to respond the next time it happens, right? So I may not realize that somebody is pushing my buttons, but I do know that that topic is one that my buttons get pushed on a lot. And what can I do to sort of come, over it? So big ag is a phrase that used to push all my buttons. And I think some people who use that phrase are very intentionally trying to use it as a code for something that's really negative. Mm-hmm. But actually, some friends and I did a panel a couple of years ago about faceless big ag, because that's the way some people think of it. And we walked on the stage and we had theater masks covering our face. And then we took the mask off and we're like, okay, so we're here and we want to talk to you about, because I think I'm part of, quote, big ag. And I'm not sure that people understand their real names and faces and people with passions for soil that are behind that. And I've been there myself. I've gone to a farm one day that I was going to hold an event at. And when I drove up, I thought, oh my gosh, this is like the stereotypical big farm. I don't know if people are going to connect with this farmer because, wow, they have like 5 combines over there, right? And so to me, that seemed, but when people got there, they met the farmer and they chatted with the farmer, and they'd never been to a farm other than like a U-Pick kind of place in the city. And they didn't know what was big ag or what wasn't. So if we had gone in with this really defensive, like ready to take people on when they had a misunderstanding or something, misinformation, it would have been really a tough way to start our day. Whereas we went, this is where we're going to be. This is who people are going to meet. Let's go ahead and just take them for a visit and see what they do. I think for some people, they've had so much fed to them. They've read so many books. They've seen so many documentaries and things. They're all about the worst part of anything. If I see a documentary and a farmer or some person, I don't even know they're farmers, but somebody is abusing an animal. Wow. It doesn't represent the farmers, I know, but I can understand why people get really upset about that. Mm-hmm. Like no animal should be abused. And so the problem is when people look at you and think, oh, I saw a farmer who had cows and he was mean to one, and there's a farmer with cows. I wonder if they're mean to him too. That doesn't automatically extrapolate, right? you don't automatically make that connection. But I would have to say so many people have seen that agenda that at this point you have to go, wow, that would really upset me if I saw that too. And the people kind of go, oh, it would? They kind of have to go, well, I didn't expect that. If they've thought that that was something that's normalized, mm-hmm. and it's not at all normalized in agriculture, how do you help them? That's a lot of pent-up emotion, right? And if you're really emotional about a topic, I don't think very well when I'm really emotional.
Yeah, what is it? The frontal lobe shuts down or whatever, right?
Yeah. My heart can take over my head in a heartbeat. Like it's just, and the redheaded temper comes in too, right? So outrage will do it in a minute. But I think it's really something to understand that level of compassion and go, wow, well, I would be really upset about that too. Can you tell me more? What did you see? I'm not familiar with that. Can you tell me what was going on? And see if you could better understand. And if people feel like, wait a minute, they're trying to understand me, they usually felt heard, right? In a different way than if you're trying to respond to them the entire time they're talking. So it's really hard as somebody who has been on hundreds and hundreds of farms for me to think that somebody would abuse an animal, because I've seen the lengths to which farmers and their families go to save animals when they're threatened by, some natural wildlife or something, right?
Right. Well, we just had this huge snowstorm in the Midwest, and I was just watching the news last night and this morning. South Dakota has been hit very hard, and they actually had the reporter talking to cattle ranchers who took shifts to keep eye on their cattle all night.
Yeah.
They're really concerned for the cattle. So
yeah, it's been horrible. My friend Troy and Stacy Hadrick have gotten feet of snow this week, and they keep moving the snow so that the cows' pen has enough room that the cows can get to food and stuff. Obviously, you have to eat more when it's that cold for cattle to have the energy. They love the weather, but if they're not able to eat, they're not going to have the energy for their bodies to really maintain their activity level that you need while you're outside, right? It's why God loves comfort food is so important to us in the winter months, right? And so Troy and Stacy have been out there fighting that good fight. And of course, the wind keeps taking it over. And 2 a.m., there's Troy in the tractor clearing the cow pen again of snow that's blown back in so that the cattle, and especially the calves, because they've got young cows right now, they've just been calving. And they need to be able to get to food. They need to be able to keep moving. You can't leave them just stuck. And when you see that and you know that that's what farmers are doing, in my mind, for somebody to then suggest that those same people would be less than great to their animals, it's easy for me to see why people would get so mad that they would have a hard time listening to a person. And most of those folks who've come to that mistaken opinion have only done it because they've seen these videos that have agendas or things along that line. And if you start listening to them and go, would you mind sitting down and let's just look at my Twitter? Let's go to Troy Hadrick. He's in South Dakota. Let's look at some of the videos he's been doing. Yeah. And they would see real people and they'd go, wait a minute, he's trying to be heard. And I think that's where, so many of these conversations online have been happening. I first met a woman in Chicago. Gosh, it's been almost 8-10 years. And she really hated big ag. And she was really proud of the fact that she was gardening in her backyard. And I garden. I love my garden. I don't have it set up really yet this year, so I need to get on it. But she really disliked big ag for a variety of reasons. And she had a lot of pent up anxiety and things over it. And it's hard to have those conversations. But me and some farmers reached out and we talked to her over time. And it's not like she's like, oh, bring me all the GMOs now. She's like, okay, maybe. But, she's gotten to a place where we're such good friends. We actually traveled in Europe together, right?
Wow.
And part of it is being able to hear people out and say, wow, that would be horrible if a company would do that. I would never work for a company that would do that myself. And they kind of look at you and they're like, wait a minute. But over time, people get to know you and they learn who you are and they get a better appreciation. And social media has really given us a different ability to reach people who are very different than us. I mean, a lot of us set it up so that we're only in these silos and we're only talking to ourselves. But one of the best things about it is you can connect to people who are so dramatically different than you and start learning about the world around you. It's a great place for exploration.
Right. And because of your political background, or your political science background, I think you might be a little bit more keen on that idea. But as you bring this up, it reminds me of an interview that I did with Dietram Scheufele, who talks about communicating science in a modern media environment. And it was episode 100 because I remember it's easy to remember because it was my 100th episode. And Dietram talked a lot about, because he works with food and politics, talking about how we do tend to be in our bubbles and how broadcasting has kind of changed into narrowcasting. And if we don't surround ourselves with differing opinions, then that's not helping us learn and grow and maybe challenge some of our own biases, or at least, connect some of those dots and, gets rid of this polarization. If anyone's interested, they can check out that episode. But I wanted to bring that into the conversation because we're talking about being a better listener. But if you're surrounded by everybody with the same opinion as yours, and I think that's part of what you experienced at South by Southwest, is even just completely different topics than you would have normally been interested in. So we can talk more about that. But also on the topic of being a better listener, it sounds like one of the things you're saying, which is, I like just easy baby steps, is one of the best things is just asking more questions. And it doesn't mean you have to be, like a investigative journalist or a podcast host with your questions. It can just be, wow, tell me more.
Right.
Tell me more about that.
Right. One of the tips I found really works for me is when I hear somebody say something that makes me feel like, oh, either one, it sparks some outrage or an emotional response or absolute celebration that I'm totally on the same page as them, any of those things, I try and ask like 3 questions about what they're doing to better understand it before I go wholeheartedly in, right? Because I think it's really easy to get caught up in a headline on Facebook or something like that, right? So whatever it is, I try and go a few steps further to better understand. So if it's a headline that ticks me off, or if it's something that somebody says that I'm like, oh my God, I'm so with you on that, I try and use a little more critical thinking. It's not something your body does automatically, so you have to train it as a habit because it's really easy just to hit the share button either way. So for me, I actually go and I look at whatever I'm, interested in. I'll click on it, look at the website. Is it really a website that has my respect, or is it a website I've never heard of, or something? What does the website look like? Does it look like a trustworthy website? Does it present both sides of the topic, or does it only present one side? Does it present like clickbaity kind of things? If so, I'm probably going to pass on it. And it's hard because sometimes it's like, oh, I so agree with this. This is like, this other thing has outraged me. I need to share this so everybody knows this is what I agree with. But frequently, if I go through all that process, I realize, wait a minute, there's maybe something else out there. And if it's a friend has shared it, I may ask them, hey, excuse me, do you have more information on this? I was looking, it's talking about this policy or this thing. I looked on Google and I can't find it because some of it is just slap out not true.
Right. Well, and I think that's one of the good things about Twitter that I know my dietitian colleagues have heard over and over again, and I share when I do social media workshops, is you really do have to read it before you tweet it. And to your point, even stuff that seems to align with your views. And, it's really easy to be like, oh, this colleague, like I'll use an example, Neva Cochran, like I know she vets her stuff. I know that her and my values align with hers, but I still am careful to read just in case, there might be something in there that I disagree with or whatever before I share it. And so to your point, even things that seem to align with your values. And you mentioned critical thinking, which I did a recent interview with Jason Reese, where we get into some critical thinking, nuts and bolts, and behavior change. So I highly encourage people to check that out. I can't remember the episode number. I'll put that in the intro.
I listened to one of your interviews with him. He's a really sharp character.
He is. I love the work he's doing. So much food for thought. And, one of the things that ties into what we were talking before you mentioned critical thinking that I think is one of the easy nuggets to pull out of what Jason Reese is teaching us is this knowledge illusion, is that people think that they have this knowledge. They don't realize that there's a knowledge gap. and they think because they're familiar with something that they're knowledgeable. And he uses the example of, can you really tell me how a bike works? And he has people draw the bike and the chain isn't even touching the, it's just going from tire to tire.
Nobody ever gets those gears right.
Yeah. So I think, that's one of the things that we need to realize, is that people are human. Mm-hmm. They're probably going to be having these failures of critical thinking just as we are. But yeah, so he gets into some of the nuts and bolts on that, which is, I find really interesting.
Well, I think part of it is you have to seek out people with different opinions than you.
Right.
I think whether it's Facebook or Twitter or something like that, people occasionally think it's all the algorithm's fault. Well, we should all understand the way the tools are built. They're going to serve you up information that you're most likely to enjoy. And it's the same on Google, right? So the information that you're most likely to click on, whether it's enjoy or because you love being outraged, they understand that about you. So, sometimes I search for something one way and then I search for it the opposite way. So
interesting.
Like food will give you cancer or foods that don't give you cancer, foods that cure cancer, right? Like all of those things give you very different topics. And it's hard for people who are very much in one space to understand how a scientist in another space would talk about things. But that's one of the issues for people in agriculture is we have our own language. We have our own scientists. Most people don't know what agronomy is in the world. And if they think about it, they'll say, oh, it's like a study of agriculture or science, maybe. But I would search for agronomy papers on da-da-da-da. And most people would say news about, right? They would get would be very different, right?
Right.
And so I think part of what we've been doing online is getting more people to try in the agricultural tribe to talk in the terms that regular people use instead of only in our own specialized language.
Right. So we're talking about facts versus feelings. I mean, yes, we want to convey information. You've been addressing that, the listening and the shared values and the questions, tell me more, and those reactions, those emotions. But you talk a lot about creating a sense of wonder. Like, yes, we need to share information, but nobody really wants to be educated. So talk to me a little bit about creating that sense of wonder, and we can also talk about storytelling.
Yeah, well, if you don't mind, I'll go back to mentioning Mr. Ray and that first farm visit that I really undertook, right? Mm-hmm. He could have given me a very science-based, okay, the clay content in this field is at 43%, Janice. And if you notice over here, this field is only at 25%. I wouldn't have noticed the clay content. He knows those numbers, whatever they are. He could have made it very dry, right? Instead, what Mr. Ray did was say, Janice, let's hop out of the truck for a little bit. And he grabbed a shovel and he walked out there. He goes, I want to show you some things about the soil in this field. And he took that shovel and he pulled the spade of it up. And there was this slice of the earth right on his shovel. And he started going, I don't know, what do you see here? And he asked me questions. And I started looking at soil so much closer than I ever had before because I wanted to get this stuff right. Like he's given me the opportunity to be the one who notices things, right? So I'm like, well, I can't help but notice there's like the roots coming through here. And what are these air holes? And, oh, look, there's an earthworm, right? And immediately he had me with this sense of wonder. I was learning about soil without him go, okay, we're going to teach you about soil today. Mm-hmm. I know way more about soil than you know, Janice. Mm-hmm. So you're going to learn from me today. He didn't do that, right? Instead, he knew a lot more than me. He knew one way to do it would be to let me learn for myself and to let me ask him questions. Because when that happens, I'm like fully engaged. Had he been in full instructor mode, it's really easy for us to especially in today's world, we'd be like on our cell phones, right? At the time, that wasn't really a question. But when somebody is helping you discover what's going on, you're different than if somebody's teaching you, educating you something, right? And I think the ability to unveil that sense of wonder is a thing that storytelling really can help you do, because it's not instruction, it's storytelling. And very few of us are paying anybody tuition these days. So if I wanted an education, I'd be getting a degree at the end of it. Thank you very much. And that might impact how much I get paid on my next job, right? So let's think about it in a way that's a little bit different. It's great. Like, you learn the most, though, when you have those really experienced guides. Mm-hmm. So somebody like Mr. Ray, who'd been studying his soils there for probably 50 years already. You know, what I could learn from him today as he's in his 80s, shocking. I would ask him a question and he would go, "That's great, Janice. Did you know last year I planted soybeans in this field? Next year I'm going to plant cotton. So the kinds of roots that'll be in the soil next year will be different." And I had no idea. Tell me, what's the difference in those kind of roots? And he'd explain that soybeans have a fibrous root system and cotton has a big, long tap root. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, what does that do to your soil, right? And he had me eating out of his hand. I couldn't learn enough.
Yeah. You know, just as a side note, I really feel like if people learned more just about soil health, it would level the playing field, sort of. Like, I was at the lentils tour in Canada, and that's when I really learned a lot about soil health. And it was just interesting to hear how every farm is different, every acre is different, every farmer is different. There's different ways of farming for different parts of the world,
right?
Different parts of the land. But it was interesting to hear in that particular location with the lentils that the organic farming did not take care of the soil as well as their conventional farming did for the lentils fields that I was in Canada. So it just was really interesting to learn about soil health. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that that's kind of where you started at the ground.
It's amazing to me that different farmers, you know, they have to pick from all these different practices. And sometimes when you pick one practice, it means you can't have others, right? So the farms that you were visiting that were using more kind of modern ag, conventional ag kind of techniques on lentils instead of organic, they may have been able to do something called no-till, which Mr. Ray was, you know, pioneering 50 years ago when he came back from a war, right? But that's like letting your soil stay the way it is and not having to go through and disc it or take one of those big plows behind the tractor that stirs up all the dirt, which used to look so pretty for us. But what we found is the ecosystem under that top layer of soil, all the earthworms and everything, you've disturbed their home. So let them keep doing what they're doing to aerate your soils, to make it able to be like a sponge and absorb all this water when the rain comes, so it has the water when you start being dry and things like that. It's amazing. So I love that you learned that. And I would love to get on a lentils tour someday. The Pulse people are, chickpeas and lentils both.
It was amazing. Yeah, it was wonderful. I also went up to Canada 1 year for the canola tour, and it was just so amazing. Regarding soil health, if anybody's interested, I did an interview with Jenny Schmidt. It was the second time she was on the show, and we talked about soil health. I don't remember the episode number. I will also put that in the intro as well. But yeah, so let's talk about storytelling, because I think that this is something that you're really passionate about. And I remember when I worked for the Dairy Council and we were starting to do a lot more media training with farmers, as soon as we kind of shifted to, let us help you tell your story, storytelling versus media training, they were so much more interested. Like, if we talked about media training, they just like, wow, I don't want to talk to the camera. No, I just, we're like, no. How can you tell your story? We just saw a lot more interest and excitement about it. So I think it's really important for farmers to tell their stories and for people like you to help tell those stories. So yeah, tell me about your interest in storytelling.
First off, like today, if I asked you what was your favorite story as a child, you probably know a book or a story your family would share or something along that line. Or I could ask you who's the best storyteller in your family, right? For me, it goes to my mom's older cousin immediately, because he could have you laughing so hard. And then the next moment, you would feel so deeply, like you would be so entranced with what he was going to say next, right? Like you would forget everything else. So stories are really memorable. They're easy to pass along, whereas facts are a little bit harder than that, right? Not everybody has a mind for numbers, but if you tell people some numbers when you're telling a story, it really does shift it around. And it helps you tell something that's pretty complex in a more simple way. You know, a lot of times I get into conversations about GMOs, and wow, you know, explaining GMO technology could be really very tough if you wanted to go through all the things that a molecular geneticist does in that process. But if you could find a story to tell it, then the person would probably understand the power of the technology as well as how the technology works on a basic level. What's nice is they would be able to share it with other people, right? So it kind of pulls all those things together in a neat format. And it's funny because I do think that, you know, when you're a farmer and you're in small town America and stuff, I think we appreciate storytelling so much because we do it while we're at the coffee shop waiting for the rain to pass or whatever it is, right? Because we don't have those normal structured jobs, right? So those rainy days, we get a lot of storytelling going on. So I don't know. Part of it for me is thinking about those stories that help you illustrate what you really want to talk about. So for us, a lot of farmers have been looking at how to talk about the environment in ways that people would be really interesting. So storytelling around soil health and soil science is really important to learn. Another one is storytelling about your role in food safety. What are the things that you do around food safety? What do you know about food safety? Because that's a topic that a lot of people really care deeply for. For me on food safety, to tell somebody who's got a child with an allergy, oh, I'm sure that must be really hard for you, is one thing. But to say, you know, I don't have a food allergy, and I never realized how lucky I was until I was at dinner with my friend Barb, and I was trying to help her with her sons, and I reached over and cut up Joshua's food, and luckily somebody else said, "Did you cut shrimp with that knife before you cut Joshua's food?" And I went, oh my God, I could have been the reason that there was a problem for Josh because he does have a food allergy to shrimp, right? And so I had to take the food away from a small child that I had just cut up, right? Who was hungry. And it's like, wow, but I didn't want to be, wow, I could have made a big mistake right there. It shows how much I care about kids with food allergies without saying I care about kids with food allergies, right? And I think those are the things that then people feel it instead of just being told it.
You and I had talked about storytelling offline, and I just want to share with the listeners too that I attended a storytelling workshop at the NIH, National Institutes of Health. And it was really about narrative. And it was Dr. Mike Strauss had presented at FNCE in October, and he works with Randy Olson, who is a marine biologist turned Hollywood filmmaker, who has since kind of gone back to the science world and sort of bringing it full circle. He conducts these story circles. And so I've attended storytelling workshops. I've incorporated storytelling into my media trainings and my speaker trainings. But this was an entirely different level because we really got more into, I've learned the structure of narrative and things like that before, but it's actually quite complex, but I do want to share a basic concept that I learned from him.
Yeah.
And he talks about the ABT, and that stands for and, but, therefore. I'll put links to his books. He's got books and a website. I'll put those in the show notes at soundbitesrd.com. But basically, he said this is like a muscle that needs to be developed. It's not just like a formula or a template.
Yeah.
But like I said, I wanted to share. So ABT and, but, therefore, it could be a sentence. It could be a paragraph. It could be a whole book. But the and stands for just information that you're sharing. And the but is sort of the contradiction. And the therefore is the consequence. So it was just a really interesting journey to kind of think about incorporating that into the structure of how you share information. And you just really there's content and then there's form. So your content could be anything. And when I was at NIH, we were working with researchers from all different aspects of science, and even looking at the flow of a journal article with the abstract and the methods and the results, the IMRAD. And so it was just really interesting. We had to read a bunch of blurbs and determine whether they were using the ABT structure and so on. So if anybody's interested, I can share more information on that. Like I said, the book that I read by Randy Olson is called Houston, We Have a Narrative, Why Science Needs Story. And it's interesting because the whole Houston, We Have a Problem, the story behind that that's really the soundbite. It's not exactly what was said. It was Houston, we've had a problem. We've had a problem. I think it was the actual quote.
Interesting.
So anyway, not to get off too much on that tangent, but because you're interested in storytelling, I wanted to share that with you.
I think part of it is really giving thought to our stories is helpful. And you do think about what causes the conflict, right? So depending on how they talk about storytelling, a lot of times they talk about a conflict, they talk about a climax, they talk about resolution, they talk about the characters, right? And when you realize you need all those things kind of coming together, the and, but, and therefore, or whatever, and you need characters in it, right? Mm-hmm. It's nice to have a hero. So Mr. Ray gets to be the hero, right? My story about soil. He's the hero because he's educated me so much without trying to educate me. All those things kind of come together.
Yeah, it's fun. So along the lines of communication and information, talk to me about the difference between disinformation and misinformation.
It's really fun. I actually was on a panel at South by Southwest recently where we talked about that. And misinformation is a lot of the stuff we see where, maybe somebody gets something a little bit wrong, or they misunderstood, they didn't catch the context of something. So when they pass it along, there's some misinformation there. Disinformation is different, and it's more deliberate, and it's much more specifically geared to accomplishing a certain outcome. And so on this panel, one of the topics I used as disinformation was a few years ago, as we were seeing problems with microencephalitis in Brazil and other areas of South America, somebody started saying that this microencephalitis was being created by Monsanto. And it's so far from what was actually happening as a mosquito-borne disease, right? But that had a very specific agenda behind it, was to put fear about our company and fear about what was going on, and to set us up as somebody who doesn't care about the health of women and children and all those different things. And it was paid for advertising on different social media and different websites and things along that line that then some people passed along probably innocently just because they were so outraged or so afraid. But it was set up and it was done purposefully. And that's very different than just getting some information wrong. You can tell it's very different. And I think what we were talking about on this panel was sort of that now in the world today, you have to be prepared for all of those things. Like, under what world would we have ever thought we needed to be prepared as companies for something that's so ludicrous that we could never think that I would be accused of something like that, right? Mm-hmm. And personally, the same thing can happen to us online. Folks will do some of those kind of pieces that you just kind of go, where did that come from? And people who are close to it, people who understand it, there were no doctors passing that stuff along, right? Mm-hmm. But people who were afraid would be passing it along. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the kind of moment that now there's places like Snopes that people go and look up to see, wait a minute, is this a scam? All of us are so used to the scam emails trying to get money out of you, right? Bitcoin out of you, whatever it is. We look at a lot of the financial things that pop up in our emails and stuff that way.
The robocalls and stuff. But yeah, when all that started, we didn't know.
Yeah. And so I think it's really changed the way communication works. It's very strange to have been in a spot where agriculture and our company were feeling that maybe before others. I would say vaccines certainly were targeted by similar kinds of things early on. And we as a country are beginning to come out of that some, and it's tough to deal with the ramifications, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can all understand that one-on-one, if we're talking to a neighbor or somebody and we find out that they don't want to vaccinate their kids, we'll talk to them and we'll be compassionate and all that kind of stuff. But when you're in New York City and you suddenly find out what kind of outbreak you have in Brooklyn, it gets hard to be just the compassionate one-on-one conversation when you have hundreds of cases of measles where it's becoming an epidemic. And so kind of thinking about how to address that on a local basis, on an individual basis, and yet on a corporate basis was part of what we were doing. We didn't have all the answers, but getting a lot of people in the room to have that conversation was really useful, which I loved. It's the kind of thing where I ended up on a panel with somebody from a small data company there in Austin and somebody from a worldwide agency that places gosh knows how many ads for the brands that you and I have known in our homes our whole lifetimes, and me. It's a very strange combination of people, but South by Southwest enables you to do a good bit of that, where you bring together very different mindsets and different viewpoints. I find myself attending a lot of sessions from like data and analytics people, folks who are using artificial intelligence in ways that go well beyond like Google Photos, where I can search for a picture of a tractor and it knows where the tractors are and all the photos I've taken over the last few years. Mm-hmm. AI does a lot more than that. And in farming, AI is going to be able to find the weeds in the field and help you get them taken care of, right? Mm-hmm. So that you're not making blanket applications of things. You're able to apply on those weeds specifically. And we were able to sponsor a space with Land O'Lakes and kind of convene some conversations around food and agriculture and different topics around the environment and how we make our choices in food, all those kind of things. Some of them were really cool, like interactive displays. So when you came in, you would be asked a set of questions and you'd use a piece of yarn and you'd kind of draw your own line graph where you kind of go, okay, wait a minute. I make my choices on food based first on cost, nutrition, environmental impact, taste. What is your choice, right? And you put a circle around that and your yarn goes on to the next space. And I think gene editing is okay if it's being used for curing diseases that plants might have, nutritional efforts. It was really very interesting to see how everybody made their own choices, right? Mm-hmm. And it started a really great conversation. And we were able to have that conversation over a period of 3 days with like 6,000 people coming in and talking to them about all those great pieces of biodiversity and our diets and pieces. It's amazing because some of those folks were there to study, to be experts on cryptocurrency, or maybe they were an expert in smart cities, or, you know, I went to a session about mental health in the kitchen and sort of, you know, typically there's this idea that you can be really mean and nasty to some people if you're a high-end chef. We've seen it on some of the TV shows, right? And that may be really hard on your kitchen staff. And all of those ideas are swirling around at the same place. Mm-hmm. And you get to think so many different thoughts because you're not just with one small group of people that share the same ideas. So for me, those are the places I really crave to go, and our business really benefits from showing up in those venues. Mm-hmm. We know what we know. We don't always know what we don't know. And those kind of places let us get exposed to some of the things that maybe we haven't been exposed to before.
Yeah. Well, clearly you love learning and it works well for you. And that sounds like a really great environment for that. And yeah, I feel like we are kind of, and I don't know if social media has spurred this or if it's just a natural evolution, but I do feel like we are kind of coming around as a society to, politics aside, that we're maybe more in the food arena, that we're really having more conversations versus trying to label or put our views. I mean, maybe I'm just the eternal optimist, but it does seem that we are at least understanding that the conversation needs to occur, and maybe learning sometimes the hard way what is not helping move a productive conversation forward and what is. But I'm hoping that people are realizing, like we can't just skip over that part. We have to go through that piece to get to a positive outcome or to get to the desired outcome. We have to have those dialogues, and they're really important.
I think it's maybe a little bit of a natural evolution of the conversation taking place. And maybe some of that conversation is happening online. Others, it's in real life. But I think more and more people are finding that food is too important to let the buzzwords lead the conversation or dominate the conversation.
Yes.
I think people are looking for a deeper meaning.
Yes, absolutely.
I think we all benefit when that happens.
So in wrapping up, is there anything in your years of experience and what you've seen, whether it's in person or on social media, that you want to share with us about farming, about agriculture, communications, sustainability? I love the takeaway about asking somebody 3 questions. I think that's just a lot more specific than, try to listen better and maybe ask 3 questions, because I can see how that gets you that layer deeper. Is there anything else that you wanted to say in wrapping up about farming or communications?
I hope that most of your listeners are really interested in sort of where food comes from, the origins of food. I hope they're out there exploring and finding great resources about it. If they're looking for, kind of first person resources, I actually have a lot of that on my LinkedIn, where I have different lists of farmers who are doing great things on Instagram or Twitter, because everybody has their own platforms that they really enjoy. And if some of your listeners are looking to get out of their silos and find some new things, maybe that could be helpful. I'll be glad to send you that link. But I'd also say, look through search tags on Twitter, right? So there's an ag book club that I just think is amazing. A girl named Gracie and some others run it. But, that would be a conversation with people who are involved in production ag, as well as people who just otherwise want to listen, want to have a conversation around a book that's also talking about agriculture and our food. They've done so many great books. So that's a unique one. I think there are a lot of podcasts out there. You mentioned Amber is a great one in the health and nutrition. You mentioned several others. There's several that help you get to know farmers a little bit better. There's one called What the Farm, which is Rob Sharkey and Leslie Kelly kind of talking about a variety of issues. And sometimes they have chefs on and things, but a lot of times they're talking to farmers. And then Shark Farmer and the Future of Ag podcast are really good in helping people understand agriculture too. I love that I get to be a voice for agriculture, but I think there's so many other people in that farming space that I wanted to be able to give props to a few of them, if you didn't mind.
Oh, no, I love it. Thank you. And yeah, we'll get all of those links and put them in the show notes at soundbitesrd.com. Those sound like really wonderful, valuable resources. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today and for all the great work you do. Clearly, you are fueled by passion and a passion for learning and a passion for connecting with other people and connecting people with each other. So thank you so much, Janice.
Thank you, Melissa. We'll have a great weekend.
Thank you. And for everybody listening, as always, enjoy your food with health in mind. Till next time.
For more information, visit soundbitesrd.com. Music by Dave Burke.